I really just needed to clear the muck, if you will. What happened as a consequence of trying to survive is I added all these layers to my life. I tried being straight. I tried to be as white as I possibly could because I felt like that's how I was going to make it in the world. That's how I was going to be successful. And then when you start to square away who you are and figure out those core values that you want to live out in your everyday life, well, you need to go through all those layers that you built up over time and figure out what is real, what is not, what is true to my nature, and what do I need to get rid of. I think that process was really what got me to where I am today, to feel grounded in those things that I know really add to my well being and flourishing instead of taking away from it.
How's it going, everyone? Dr. Frankie here with another episode of Love, Laughs, and Lessons. Thrilled to be here with you all again. And Denise Rai, my co host, will introduce our wonderful guest that we have on this week.
Well, hello, everyone. We're thrilled to have Joshua Caraballo, an industrial organizational psychologist based in Denver, Colorado. Joshua's work brilliantly weaves together inspirational storytelling and applied science, aiming to uplift those who have been historically marginalized and oppressed. He is deeply committed to the themes of human flourishing and creating awe inspiring experiences in nature. A compassionate soul, Joshua extends his empathy not only to people, but to all sentient beings. He's has a special place in his heart for anything related to cats. Joshua is also the author of the acclaimed book, I'm Not Dead Yet: How I Turned My Misfortunes into Strengths, which has been recognized with multiple awards across various categories. His book is a testament to his resilience and dedication to turning life's challenges into opportunities for personal transformation and empowerment. Welcome, Joshua. We are so happy to have you.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
I appreciate
Pleasure to
that.
have you. So I know I often say that we need adversity
Hmm.
to grow and expand. We need to have experiences that we have to work through and heal from, right? And kind of be able to reinvent ourselves. So it sounds like you've had experiences in your life that have been really challenging and you have found a way to overcome. Is that true?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think it's hard to really say or think that when you're actually going through the adversity, which makes sense, right? You're thinking to yourself, "Why me?" It is the time to be the victim, if you will, if there's a proper time at any point. Um, and then you don't wanna stay there too long. Once you're able to process that is, where is the learning sort of opportunity that exists within that atrocity, and what can we do to make ourselves better as a consequence of that? I think, again, not easy to say when you're going through it, but in hindsight, of course, there are so many ways that we can take all those things and become better and try to flourish as much as humanly possible.
So share with us a little bit. I agree with you. Give us a sense of like how you ended up here at this point. A little bit about your history.
Absolutely. So I was brought up in a Jehovah's Witness household, and my earliest memories were me understanding that I had this affinity and this visceral reaction, if you will, towards the masculine form. It was more than just a sexual thing. In fact, it was before I even understood what sex was that I had an attraction that just would not go away. I had to square that with the understanding that the God that I learned about growing up abhorred any type of homosexual behavior, especially if I were to ever act on those thoughts that I had. As you might imagine, internalizing that for quite some time, for the first 18 years of my life until I was able to leave the house and make my own decisions as a quote unquote adult, really left me with a loss in terms of identity and understanding where I fit in the world. I was born in the late 70s and grew up in the 80s and 90s, obviously. So the world was also a little bit different than it is now. And I would venture to say, although this is not like a research-based assessment, it's on my personal experience. I feel like things were harder for gay men during that time, those who identified that way, trying to be out. The more that I tried to squelch or resist these urges or these thoughts that I had, the harder it became to be authentic and be myself. And the more that I felt that I just didn't belong here on the earth. What this ended up having me do, although I didn't understand it at the time, was engage in behaviors that were actually trying to make me as numb as possible so I wouldn't have to feel or think about the fact at that time that I thought was a fact that I just don't belong on the earth and that God hated who I was and there was nothing I could do to change that. So by engaging in behaviors that were abusing drugs and alcohol, you can imagine the litany of other types of behaviors that came as a consequence of that. And the more I engaged in that, the more trouble I got into. And before you knew it, was faced with hitting bottom several times,
And just like I don't
and
want to make
even going
assumptions. Being promiscuous also, like just reckless behavior. Give
absolutely.
it.
Absolutely, and as a result of being promiscuous, I also contracted HIV,
Mhm.
and I ended up, having a prison stint. So that that's a lot of things that I just said and talked
Yeah.
about. What I didn't talk about is, when I turned 18, I left the house, and I'll try to make this quick because I know I gave a lot of details. I wanna give some space for questions and responses to that. But when I turned 18, I decided to leave and go to New York. That's where I was originally from. I was born in Staten Island, and when I returned there, as you might imagine, I tried to engage in every type of behavior that I was suppressing for those 18 years. It wasn't too long afterwards, about 6 months in, that I, found out that there was a growth inside my chest, and fast forward, I was in stage 4, and was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. As you might imagine, what would happen to a person who was taught during their formative years what I was,
Mhm.
I logically put together that this was my penance and what I
Mm.
deserved for being who I was. And so that was also a major sort of precursor to my behaviors and all the things that took place thereafter that I just talked about.
Oh my gosh. So like one human to talk about adversity, right? To be having to confront all of those things subsequently, I'm sure, and sometimes maybe concurrently, these things happening at the same time. I mean, that I could see how somebody would then be like, well, this is so overwhelming. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't even know how do I wake up every morning and face myself, face the world? So somehow you took all of that and you turned it around. Like, what was the first step? Like the first
Uh,
thing that you did? Yeah.
well, getting in trouble actually
Ah.
helped because you're forced to face all the consequences and of your actions. As I mentioned, like some of these things were out of my control. So it's also understanding what is in my control, what was not in my control, and then focusing on what I can do to change. And I had plenty of time because I was in prison I was sentenced for 16 months and I ended up spending 14 months for good behavior and getting released a couple of months early. But that wasn't the only thing. When I got out, I decided that I wanted to look into getting a doctorate because at that point I had a master's degree. And I realized that the thing that I had gravitated towards the majority of my life was psychology. And I decided to look into how to use applied psychology. And I ended up in, workplace psychology or IO psychology, as they call it. What this has really helped me look into is how I can take what I started in prison and maintain it over the long haul. And one of the models I came across was the trans theoretical model of behavioral change by Prochaska. And I found it super, super helpful. I read that book a few times and I started implementing it. Of course, the trajectory of my change didn't look very nice and neat. Like it didn't go through all the steps. It was all over the place like a roller coaster with back and forth.
Does it ever? It's never neat. It's always a
Exactly.
mess. I've never
Exactly.
met anybody in all my years. where
Yeah.
it's a smooth
Yeah.
linear pathway.
Exactly. But I think that's important because absolutely, I've never met anyone that's gone through a linear pathway myself. But for whatever reasons, when we're faced with steps without understanding all the nuances, and this is not something that we do for a living, I can understand why people would believe, oh, well, step 1 through 5, I should logically go through those steps. But that's rarely, really how it happens, if at all. So, lots of learning lessons there, lots of different tools that I was able to put into my tool belt. I tried AA for quite some time, which was also helpful, gave me some foundations. I know we don't really talk about being in AA, but I think it's okay on
Who
this
doesn't
venue
talk about it?
to
Who
just
doesn't?
mention
Yeah.
it. Oh, well, you just talking about you being a part of it is part of like, sometimes people just say it's anonymous. So why would you say that you're actually a part of something that
Oh,
you're anonymous?
Oh, I
That's the
think
part that I want to be careful of. Like, wait,
got it.
but
Yeah.
I'm okay with like talking about being in something. So sometimes people will say, "Well, you were a friend of I forget the founder's name." So that's a different way to talk about being in AA instead of just talking about AA upfront.
Yeah.
So
And that's
I've
something
learned
that
that
they kind of say to not talk about. I didn't know that. So that's a new.
neither did I. Yeah.
it's
Everyone that I
really
know is that's in AA has actually said, "I'm in AA." Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, I've come across different perspectives, and I've had feedback that has said to
Yeah.
me, it's
Interesting.
for people who are in AA, it's really up to them whether or not they want to disclose. But I mean, that's the anonymous part. It's
Right.
that's
Got
built
it.
into the program. So yeah, I think there's room for all of that. And really, if you want to extend that, it's like there's room for all these variances that take place in different ways of finding your sobriety. But I think one of the or I should say and not but one of the commonalities or universal themes to that is figuring out what those causal elements are that are at work and creating this effect to where you're trying to numb yourself or self medicate or whatever you want to call it. So to me, there was a bunch of elements that had to come together for me to be able to find my version of sobriety and maintain that.
So what was the most influential, I guess, what for you? It sounds like you found a theory that resonated for you that was helpful, and then AA, which was part of it. But what do you feel like really made the difference? Getting in trouble, getting caught? I don't know. What?
Well, I mean, getting in trouble was the impetus, but I don't think everyone out there needs to get in trouble. This was my, journey, if you will, and I had to get in trouble because if I didn't, I would have been dead. So I had to
Mhm.
be put somewhere to where I was forced to stop. But the literature is pretty clear about when you force someone to stop something, you can get compliance, but you're not going to get true buy-in for the most part,
Mhm.
or change that last in the long term. So squaring away, I would say the most important thing was the relationship that I had with myself and falling back in love with myself. And psychology was really, really helpful in getting me to that point. Well, I had to put the hard work. So I can't just say it was all psychology. It's really that application and putting it into play. Another model that was very helpful for me is the PERMA, sometimes talked about as PERMA V model, which is a model of well being. I can go through the aspects of what that acronym is if you'd like, but it comes from positive psychology. And that has been another. So I would just say, like, a lot of models, frameworks, that gravitated towards me, whether it's because the universe was kind of showing me my pathway. Also, having helping relationships through therapy has always been a mainstay of mine in helping me to figure out ways, like I said, to add to that toolkit so that I have a litany of choices and options at my disposal when needed that I use to this very day.
So
Mhm.
you were in therapy early on, right? Like weekly therapy?
Oh,
Which
yes. Yes. I've engaged in so many different types of therapy. Uh, Absolutely. From when I started my journey through cancer and having that was about 2 years. That was the beginning of my process of having these helping relationships with therapists.
So would you say today the person that you are, because it sounds like you've had to reinvent yourself more than once. Would you say
Yeah.
that you really like who you are today?
Oh my gosh, I love who I am. I don't know if I truly had to reinvent myself. I think that's a very interesting way to frame it. I mean, perhaps that is something that I've had to do, but I believe all these elements were actually within me the entire time. And so I really just needed to clear the muck, if you will. 'Cause what happened as a consequence of trying to survive is I added all these layers to my life. I tried being straight. I tried to be as white as I possibly could because I felt like that's how I was going to make it in the world. That's how I was going to be successful. And then when you start to square away who you are and figure out those core values that you want to live out in your everyday life, well, you need to go through all those layers that you built up over time and figure out what is real, what is not, what is true to my nature, and what do I need to get rid of. I think that process was really what got me to where I am today, to feel grounded in those things that I know really add to my well being and flourishing instead of taking away from it.
So I imagine what I'm hearing is brutal honesty with yourself.
Yes, yes. I think the relationship that we have with ourselves is probably the most important relationship that we will ever have. There are so many mainstays, if you will, or sayings that come from either the literature or just like, that are passed down through families. And usually what ends up happening is, I'll give you one. Like you can't love yourself until, before you love yourself, right? Things like that. And there's so many other things that it usually starts with us, with a true understanding of ourselves. But that's easier said than done. How many times have we thought to ourselves, well, I've lived X number of years on this earth. Of course, I know who I am. And then we surprise ourselves as we begin to dig deep and have those crucial questions that we ask ourselves. But yeah, I think it's being brutally honest with ourselves, the good, the bad, the indifferent, like everything. And also, mindfulness has been very helpful for me to accept what I come across. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to change, but it means that, I'm not going to be so hard on myself because, as you might imagine, coming to terms with things and wanting to change, um, for me anyway, brought itself some perfectionists ideologies with it. And so I've also had to spend some time telling myself it's okay not to be perfect, and I don't need to look for the perfection in everything that I do and in every interaction and in every relationship that I have.
Yeah. How do you know you're being brutally honest when when it is you, the self, that has got you into the position that you're in? So if it's your voice, how do you know when it's brutally honest?
It's such a wonderful question. I love that, Denise. Thank you so much. I think it is having the ability to question yourself. It is understanding when your constitution, if you will, your spirit is telling you that this is the right course, this is the right action to take. And again, you have to have that really good relationship with yourself and your body in order to understand when it's reacting to something and giving you that information.
Mm.
If you spend a good portion of your life ignoring those things or misinterpreting those for whatever reasons, then it's going to be hard. And that's what happened with me. I know that my body was giving me helpful hints and telling me things, but I was ignoring it or I was masking it. Or I was using substances that was taking me into a realm where I didn't know what the messaging was, and I couldn't tell it was because I was coming off of a drug or because it was actually my body trying to, or a mixture thereof. Just convoluting that with my own behaviors, in addition to all the things that had happened to me in my life that I had attributed to me being a bad person and me not being worthy to be on this earth. So clearing that away and then constantly questioning myself, I think, and having that relationship has helped me to understand the differences in the nuances that happen when my body says, "Ooh, this is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
You need to hold on to this," versus, "Oh, no, 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 no. This is not where you need to be right now. It is completely, and I go back to, against where my core values are. Understanding what your core values are, which could change over time, but don't really change that much,
Mhm.
has also been very helpful for me, and that came through psychology. Again, yet another sort of gift. So, my religion, if you will, if I'm allowed to say this, has really been psychology. It's been the spirituality that I've gotten that I needed so sorely, because a lot of the models of well-being do state that you need some sort of spirituality, living for more than yourself, whether that exists in God, religion, the universe, etc. And so I understood that I needed to not just get away from the Jehovah's Witness religion because it just wasn't good for me, but replace it with something that was going to be beneficial.
So that answered my question. I was wondering if you are still in any capacity connected to Jehovah Witness that, follow any of the
No,
teachings.
no. But my family still is my immediate family and some of my extended family members. And what has been very helpful for me is to understand how to love them
Mhm.
and still not be a part of the religion. That has been a wonderful learning lesson, and I think it's something that I try to apply in as many interactions and relationships that I possibly can, especially in this day and age where we see here in the United States in the political landscape how the rift has gotten worse over time. And so I challenge myself, and I hope that your listeners will challenge themselves as well, to try to keep holding these disparate and seemingly opposite, and a lot of times they are not just seemingly, they truly are opposite thought processes, belief systems, ideologies, if you will, and still find ways of us being able to function and flourish
Mhm.
and still show love to people. That is the ultimate challenge at this point in time. But I feel like I've gotten some of those activities practiced through my family, and then figuring out a way that I could look at, because I believe in God to this day, and I'm not saying other people have to, everyone's different. But my God is a God that has created me in his likeness and does not think of me as a hateful person that wants to and he does not want to destroy me, or she, if you will.
Mhm.
So that, and truly believing that. So not just saying it because it makes me feel better, but
Mhm.
really taking the time to say, well, okay, do you really believe that, Josh? Because I don't want to say something that's not truly in my heart and that I don't have as part of my constitution.
It's
Yeah.
amazing, right? To go from really hating oneself and feeling like, I don't know if you believed you're going to go to hell or horrible things were going to happen if you chose to be in your authenticity. And I don't know how you identify today. Do you identify as a queer person or
Yeah,
what's your
I like the label of queer because I feel like it's more inclusive. I'm also okay with being labeled as a gay man. Yeah, so I just feel like I am definitely a part of a community, and my job is to, as far as I see on this earth, to figure out ways to share my story to give people hope and to let them know that it's never too late to change, and that no, regardless of how things start to happen and change in the next 4 years plus, that there are still people out there that are trying their best to make it work and to create opportunities for people to come together as a strong community, so that we can all flourish together. I love that word flourish. I overuse it a bit, but
I
that's one
like
of
it
my
too.
favorite words in the English language.
Yeah.
yeah.
You actually, yeah, flourish is it's amazing because it comes with the visual. Yeah.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah,
So, yeah.
absolutely.
I want to ask you about the models that you referred to early on. You mentioned the first model and Dr. Frankie commented on these steps and give us an idea of, like, for the listeners, and I don't know what the model is either. The two
Okay.
of you may know. Yeah. But can you tell us what this model was and how you applied it to your change?
Absolutely. So the trans theoretical model of behavioral change, if I'm not stepping all over my words, sometimes my brain is going faster than my mouth will allow. Starts off with pre-contemplation, then goes to contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. And then there are certain change efforts where there's another step where you can actually let go of the change effort because it's become second nature to who you are.
Mhm.
Um, Now that doesn't exist for every single change effort. It all depends on what you're trying to change. And this model has been used a lot for individuals who have struggled with substance use or abuse, if you will.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm one of those people. So when I started to read it, it just gave me perspective. It gave me understanding. It gave me the ability to feel like I'm not alone. And it also, I love some of the stats, such as not everyone has to go through a program like AA in order to find their sobriety. It's not to knock AA at all,
Mhm.
but that some people like myself need additional tools, and this is lumped usually under what's called like self changers, and that sometimes self changers can actually create successful outcomes above and beyond just doing something that is structured like AA. And that really resonated with me because I was like, okay, I think this is what I need. The reason why is because at a younger age, I always wanted to be an actor and I still dabble in the performing arts because, again, storytelling is so, so important to me, especially art and storytelling that has a message delivered because, I was brought up, with the Bible, so they all had messages and allegories of how you were to change your life for the better, and I continue that to this day. Um, and sorry, because a little bit of a tangent, but but
That's
Oh,
fine.
it's context. Context. It's good.
right. So, how do I utilize those stories to help other people change as well, and to show that it's a very messy process, like what we had talked about before.
Mhm. Mhm.
I love when I get from the pre-contemplative stage to the contemplative stage because now I'm no longer in denial. And that's the easiest way to talk about it. And that first step is crucial to helping you get to the rest. It's not the only thing that exists, but that's one of the learning lessons that really gravitated towards me. And how many things in life do I want to change or need to change that I have no idea about because it's happening automatically. Um, and I have a learned behavior that took place maybe in my formative years. Okay, so putting that aside, there's another model that I talked about that I'll try to talk about very quickly. It's called PERMA, and in some circles called PERMA V. That is positive emotion, engagement, good relationships or healthy relationships, meaning, and achievement. And the V is adding vitality to it. So each of these in the acronym is something that somebody can work towards. You can actually measure it in your life and you can figure out where the opportunities are for growth. But the argument here for this model is that every single aspect is needed in order to help you build well being and flourishing in your life. It has been super helpful for me. It is not the only model that exists out there. But if you are interested, I would say go ahead and give it a look through a Google search, you'll find it. There are plenty of those research articles if you're interested in seeing where the origins are and how it ties to evidence-based practice, um, or just learning more about. One of the last things I'll mention is for that the E, engagement, cannot take place unless you know what your core values are. And there's other assessments out there that like the values and action assessment to help you understand what your values are. It's not the only one out there. There's one that's done by Gallup that's also very helpful. My point is once you know what your top values are and then where your other values are, you can then figure out ways of forging that in your circumstances, your actions, etc., in your interactions, in your relationships. And that's what I love about that one aspect of well-being.
One thing I want to ask you, just going back to the previous model, which is
Sure.
the first phase, the first step in my mind, it's pre-contemplation, correct? I'm going back to graduate school days.
Yeah.
So I have found in practice that many people get stuck for a long time in that.
Yeah.
And can you describe that phase, what that looks like? The
Sure. I think what's been helpful for me is what we call discrepancy raising. So this happened a lot with my family, even though it wasn't intentional. They didn't learn this. Sometimes human beings are doing this naturally. what they were doing is they were very loving about my situation, but also giving me these friendly, I shouldn't say friendly, sometimes they were not so friendly, reminders of what I was doing to them when I was, as an example, missing for 3 days and they couldn't find me. And then I would finally come home and my mom would be crying her eyes out and saying, I thought you were dead. The whole thing that would come with that sort of conversation. I had to square away in my mind all the fun, the great time, the beautiful thing about all the drugs, which is why we keep going back to them because it makes us feel good and forget about our woes with what was happening in front of me and the repercussions of my behavior. And that doesn't automatically shake you out of pre contemplation or denial. What it does is it plants a seed, and you don't know how many seeds, because it's different for everyone,
Mm,
that will eventually get to a point to where you say, because I couple that with how many times I hit rock bottom. I was in the hospital. I could have died. I crashed my car. Those are also seeds as well. Although in my mind, you would hope and think that it would be much more than a seed, but the precursor or inciting incident for change. But it doesn't always happen, and I'm not the only one. So it sounds extreme, but a lot of people have to go through several rock
mm,
bottoms before they reach a point to where they say, "I've had enough." And I think this concept of enough is also very important. And it's not just important for change; it's also important for like figuring out your threshold, which is the first part of the model of PERMA. The P is for positive emotion, which you can get from having sex, great relationships, although that's another part of the acronym. Having chocolate, for me, chocolate is wonderful, but after the third or fourth piece of chocolate, it starts to have diminishing returns. And so, this concept of enough really is helpful for me because I can still gain that great feeling from having chocolate, but keep it in balance so that I'm not overdoing it. And so that was also helpful for me, this concept of enough to where have I treated my body in such a way to where do I want to die? Do I want to remain on this planet? All those questions really became crucial for me to getting from pre-contemplation to contemplation.
So you could be in pre-contemplation for years. Like,
Absolutely, absolutely.
and that's
Yes.
just like not really mobilizing to change things. It's more, right? It's like you
Mhm.
just keep recapitulating. You keep doing risky, damaging behavior, right? You're stuck
Yeah.
in it and there's not much movement. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think the other thing is that's a really obvious way to be in pre-contemplation, but what are all the ways that we remain in pre-contemplation in maybe more delicate ways that we're just not aware of? And how do we bring that to our awareness? Like when I'm talking to my fiance and he's having a reaction in front of me that I'm like, why the heck are you reacting this way right now? And I'm getting upset. I'm getting triggered, if you will, or activated based on this. What's happening that I'm unaware of at that moment? And although it's not so consequential to where at that moment, because it could also build up over time, right? And become more consequential. But in those moments, I think those are learning opportunities as well to strengthen our relationships. And that doesn't make me a perfect person just saying that out loud, because the hardest part is actually doing it,
yeah.
figuring that out. Helping relationships are great, as you know, in order to help suss those things out. But I think for me, having these major learning lessons to where I had things that I was holding that was actually holding me back from flourishing.
So I just want to highlight one thing you just said.
Sure.
When in relationship, right, we trigger each other. So something comes up for you when your partner is having a moment, reacting, and then you're feeling it come up in you.
Mm.
It's important for us to look at that and recognize that's about us. What we do
Absolutely.
is like, that's what he did to me, right? He's causing me to feel this way.
Yes.
This is
It's that
what he's
ABC
done.
model.
Yes. So right, I just want to highlight it's so important to recognize like this is
Yeah,
our shit that we need to look at and be
that's
willing
right.
to work with.
Yes.
instead of externalizing it to be their issue. They're creating this in us.
Absolutely, Dr. Frankie. Like when we say this is their fault or I can't believe they are doing this to us, that's a sign of being in pre-contemplation.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. I'm happy you pointed that out because, yeah, what I was naming is something so obvious, right? And then there's a lot that's going on that is much more subtle that
Yes.
has an undercurrent and definitely impacts us in more
Right.
subtle
Because
ways.
the day that we are fighting over the pillows on the couch, it's not about the pillows on the couch. I hate to tell you.
Right? Yeah, no. And often the stuff that comes up has to do with past relationships, childhood experiences, attachments.
Absolutely. I finally found out because this was happening automatically and I didn't even realize that I was reacting until people were just calling me out in a safe way, because then calling me out was also pushing me away as well. But so, you need to have this you need to have a safe space for people to call you out. And people were saying, why are you now just reacting and coming across as frustrated and mad with me? And I'm like, I am? Wow. Oh, I am. So then I pinpoint just one thing of many, many different things, but that whenever I feel like somebody is treating me less than or as if I don't belong, I go back to that childhood where
Mhm.
I was fighting for a good portion of my life to survive. And so I go back into survival mode. Sometimes because it's been a little while now, so I'm getting a little bit better and I might need to work on this for the rest of my life, which I'm okay with.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
sometimes it's happening automatically and then I say I have to stop myself. And that's okay because that is better than, avoiding or suppressing or,
Yep.
just being in that pre-contemplative stage for much longer. It's a gift now. At least it feels that way afterwards, but, there's still these moments where I'm just like, "Damn it, I did it again. No." But that's okay.
I just think that's the human experience. Like that is we
Mhm,
have to recognize that no matter how much work we do, it's going to happen. Sometimes we're going to get
mhm,
dysregulated, we're going to be surprised by our reaction. It's just part of the journey and to look at it and go, "You know what? Here's an opportunity to learn more about myself, figure out how when that situation, if and when it comes up because it likely will come up again,
mhm.
how can I handle that differently?"
Mhm.
Right,
Mhm.
right, and it can actually be such a beautiful thing.
But where do you get the fortitude to want to stay? Because typically when stuff like that happens, you want to break away and get the hell out of there, right? You
Oh,
don't want that situation to happen again, so you're right? So
right.
let me and we think that we're doing something by saying, "Let me remove myself
Mhm.
so that this doesn't happen again."
So this leads
Oh,
right the avoidant dismissive. I'm just thinking
Yeah.
about attachment
ah,
theory, right?
yeah, yeah.
I'm out. I'm self-reliant. I know how to take care of
Right.
myself. Peace out, yo.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, using psychology has also been amazing, learning that, all or nothing thinking or black and white thinking is a cognitive distortion.
Mhm.
And more than likely, when I am all out or all in, that is an indication that I'm engaging in all or nothing thinking. And so where is the middle ground? And maybe middle ground is not even like the right thing because what it kind of gives an idea of is like it's almost like a balance where you're in the
Divine.
middle.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
say gray. Stay in the
yeah,
gray.
yeah. Where's the gray area? Where's the synergy, if you will? How do I figure out like my balance is not going to be a one to one. It just depends on the circumstance and that's okay. But figuring that out. So Denise, to your question, it sometimes what I had to do is actually leave a few times. Maybe not leave
Mhm.
altogether, but maybe leave the circumstance or the situation because that's all I knew as a reaction to that. And then slowly and surely just talking to myself and saying, that's not the only way to deal with the situation.
Mhm.
You always want to leave. How is that? Are you truly avoiding or are you giving yourself more space to kind of like process? Where's that not middle ground, but where's that gray area?
Mhm.
And how do you do better next time? And when you have that urge to leave, can you try to figure out a way to stay as
Just
hard as that might be? as difficult as that might feel,
Mhm.
how do you sit with those emotions? Because we are taught from such a young age, based on, mass media, that you are not to sit with anything that's negative,
Yeah.
That's right.
right?
You
Right.
deserve better.
You
You
just that's
deserve
right.
better.
That's a keep it
And there is something called toxic positivity.
Yeah.
And, learning that has been just as important for me, that it's okay to think Pollyanna-ish, but you don't want that to be your go-to every single time,
Mhm.
because the avoidance of negativity is not helpful.
Yeah, that's powerful. Um, yeah, that's really powerful because I'm just relating to myself and then also to the people that I work with. When the going gets tough, we get the heck out of Dodge. But to be able, but to be able to come back and say, "Yeah, let me sit with this. I know it's going to happen, and it is about me. It isn't this thing that's happening. It is how I'm perceiving whatever this is that's happening, and I need to stay." And I
Yep.
think would you say that the key to knowing that you need to stay is that reaction that you're feeling when you come back to it? So what chased you away was this need to self to protect, right? And so now
Yes.
you're coming back and you're like, okay, now what happens?
I Another thing that I learned in psychology, what is the variance accounted for in the dependent variable? So this happens in research when we talk about quantitative math. And I love it because there are explanatory variables that actually feed into the dependent variable. In this case, our dependent variable is a fight, disagreement, whatever, bad thing had happened at work. And one of those variables is it's their fault. Another variable is it's my fault. And what I love about what is the percentage accounted for, how I translate that is everyone has personal responsibility in every situation and every interaction that takes place. Your portion might be 10%, might be 90%, might be somewhere in between, but there
Mhm,
is some percentage that you are accountable for. Going and having your opportunity, whether it's outside of that dynamic or while that dynamic is happening, depending on, sometimes you just can't leave. That once you are able to process and hopefully do that, because it's easier said than done, then to me, the next step is where's my accountability? And
mhm,
again, even if it's just 5%, I still have to focus on what is my control and what can I do to make the situation better.
mhm.
So that's how I see the next step, although it doesn't always have to be the next step. That's
Yeah.
me coming back.
Also, when I think about that, Denise, it's like, am I reacting or am I acting on the situation? So if it's in reaction, you need to slow your roll,
Absolutely.
right?
So I go back to, the decision to leave or stay. And what I
Right,
mean by leave is not leave forever. So I'm
right.
not talking an all or nothing. It's like, can you go take a walk? And if you're in a meeting or a one on one, you can't always do that. So you might need to either table or say, I don't have the opportunity. And if you are able to speak this out, that's wonderful. But sometimes you
Mhm.
can't even do that. And so it's just like you have no choice but to put something aside. But that's the part where you have to really ask yourself, am I just saying that I'm doing that?
That's right.
Am I truly avoiding? Am I really going to go back to this?
Mhm,
Or is
mhm.
this just another opportunity for me to kick the can down the road and it really never gets accomplished? So
Yeah,
I think
sweep it
that's the
under the rug.
crucial,
Yeah.
that's where you have to have a good relationship with yourself and stop lying to yourself that that's what you've been doing. Just shoot the shit straight and say, like, what am I doing here? And if
Mhm.
you don't have that great relationship with yourself, or you're in this pre-contemplative stage about this whole process, then it's not going to happen. You're just going to continue doing what you're used to doing because that is an easier thing to do and it saves some of your cognition and whatever else you're trying to save at that point in time, which is okay. I mean, it's okay to save yourself, but let's also figure out ways that we could do better. So yeah, I think, and if you're practicing it in all the smaller sort of situations where it's not life or death, then it makes it a little bit easier when you get into those situations that are much more dire.
Yeah. So exercising that small muscle a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. Yeah. Okay.
and then being easier on yourself. So some people will say, "Well, I've been angry about this for 3 days." Okay, okay. I mean, as you keep practicing it, maybe it'll get it down to like 2 days or 1 day, but just be okay with the fact that, especially if it's a newish situation that you haven't
Yeah.
been in before, or interaction that you really, you haven't had the opportunity to practice for, your brain is just kinda going crazy over it. It's like, I'm
Mhm.
sorry for using crazy, I shouldn't even say that. Your brain is going wild over it, and, yeah, it's okay. Just give yourself some grace and say, "This is taking me hours or days, sometimes weeks." It all just depends on the situation.
Sometimes
There's
we
no
gotta
time
just take
frame.
time. Like,
Mhm.
it
There's no time
it
frame.
doesn't hurt to take time. It's better to take time than to do something that's really harmful to yourself, to someone else, you know?
Mhm. Mhm.
Absolutely. I wanted to write this memoir years ago when I got out of prison, and I would sit to write it, and I would just start bawling. I couldn't even see in front of me. I had so many tears coming through. My body was telling me something. It was saying, perhaps this is not the time because you're too close to these events and you're opening up old wounds and you're harming yourself actually
Mhm.
because this is what's happening. And but the first couple of times, what did I do? Just wait a couple of days or a month and then try to do it again instead of working on myself and utilizing this data to say, and that's okay. That I'm a human being, and even with all these tools, I still err or forget, or because I become emotional, my frontal lobe has been hijacked, and so now I'm like, I'm just operating as a mushy human being and not thinking logically. And then after a few years and working more on myself and talking to more helpful individuals in my life, whether that be an official professional relationship or otherwise, going back to those really good relationships and having a community of members, if you will, that are helping you and providing support for you, I was able to finally go back to that book just this year and then write it. So there's hope. It's like it's not gone forever because when you're sitting there crying, you're thinking, "I'll never be able to write this book. It's not
Mhm.
going to happen."
This
And
Yeah.
is
all those voices come up.
perfect segue because we wanna hear. Tell us a little bit about your memoir.
Sure, sure. It's pretty much just everything that I have gone through in my life up until this point and the tactics that I've used to help myself, knowing that those very same tactics, if you will, are not going to work for everybody else. So it's not about providing a template for other people.
Mhm.
I learned this early on when I was studying acting. I think this is what I was trying to get to earlier, but it's okay because we meandered about with a bunch of different things. It's been such a great conversation, but what one of the first lessons that I got about acting, that I'll never forget was the teacher said, "It is your job as an artist to take in as many different models and frameworks that you possibly can so that you can create the model and framework that'll work best for you." And I see psychology is no different. It's like there are so many things out there, and not just psychology, but when people talk about what got them through a particular bad part of their life. It's like, yeah, let's listen to that, but let's not think to ourselves, "Oh my gosh, that's exactly what I need to do." You need to figure it out for yourself, which might contain elements of that, but let's also couple it with all the other aspects of helping, tools that are out there so that you create your own tool belt and figure out your own way of flourishing. That's why I go back to this model has been so important to me, the PERMA model. I also talk about it in the book, but at the end of the day, it's really to provide hope, as I had mentioned, and solidarity, especially for those who consider themselves to be in the queer umbrella, but it's not just for them. It's for anyone who has gone through any type of atrocity in their life, so that you just know that you can put things into perspective, you can survive, you can look back, you can take learning lessons, and this thing we call life on Earth can be such a beautiful, wonderful thing if we want it to be.
Wow. Yeah, it's inspiring. I hope folks can find your memoir. Where can they find it? Where can they learn more about you? Get in touch?
Absolutely. My website is probably the easiest thing to reach out. You'll see all of my contact information as well as where you could look further into the book, which is now in an audiobook, an ebook, and a physical book if you prefer that. And that website is drjosh.solutions, which is spelled drjosh dot solutions, just like the word with an S at the end. And that's in place of a .com or .org.
And then on that site, are there any interactive anything else on there? Or is it mostly the memoir?
Yeah, I mean, I talk a little bit about myself and my services that I do. I consult with companies occasionally, but my main job is my 9 to 5, if you will, is working with a national nonprofit as a managing director of research. So that takes the majority of my time, but I also engage in my spare time, if you will, in trying to help organizations in the nonprofit sector. So you'll see information about that as well as how to contact me on my social media, and of course, the book.
Awesome. Such
Awesome.
a pleasure, Joshua. Thank you for joining
Thank
us
you so
today.
much. So
Thank you,
good.
Dr. Frankie and Denise. It has been an absolute honor to be here.
And I'm so happy you're thriving, you're flourishing. You're on your way to getting married. Is that right?
Yes,
All right.
yes, just got engaged. So,
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
For
thank you
sure.
so much. I
Hap-
appreciate that.
Wishing you all the best.
Thank you.
And everyone, thanks for tuning in. We will see you all next week. Kisses, hugs. Take care,
Bye
everyone.
bye.